Last time we left off talking about Asia, a vast area. We looked at some statistics. Um, for example, although Greater Asia encompasses 1/3 of the world's land area, unevenly compressed into that land mass is about 5/8 of the world's population. 6 of the world's 8 most populous nations are in Asia. China and India alone comprise over 1/3 of the world's population. Many of the world's largest cities are in Asia. Now, um, despite that grouping, there are differences in the cultures in Asia. The mountains have provided a barrier that isolates the cultures in the different areas of Asia and explains their great differences. Now, we're going to continue looking at Asia a bit this morning. All of the major world religions originated in Asia. That's an interesting statistic. These religions have had a tremendous hold upon their adherents, much more so than that of animism upon tribal populations. Animism, you may recall, refers to those religious systems that are based on nature, worshiping things in nature. Being considered more developed religions, these Asian religions, their complex philosophies and religious practices shaped their culture and have made them dominant features in the life of most Asians. The result is that it has been much more difficult for the gospel of Christ to penetrate these cultures over the centuries. However, today, there are a number of factors which are beginning to make more Asians open to the gospel as never before. Don Hoke, my materials quoted him. I wanted to know who he was. He served as a missionary for 22 years and founded Tokyo Christian College and Japan Biblical Seminary. He testified from personal experience this quote: "In the growing urban centers, we are witnessing the spread of a great gray, materialistic, secular, blended culture across the entire continent." Does that have a familiar ring to it? I think that happened here before it happened there. Under the surface lies the same meaninglessness, the same search for pleasure, the same indifference to old religions, except for marriage and death ceremonies, the same practical agnosticism, and the same openness toward Western, and we put this in quotation marks, improvements. The impact of Western education upon intellectuals or highly educated people of Asia has brought irreversible changes. Western materialism has undermined the religious allegiance of many Asians. For example, and this is interesting, Muslim college students in many parts of the Muslim world are far less likely to say their prayers and attend the mosque for Friday prayers. This can give greater opportunities for the entrance of the gospel. A weakening allegiance to that leaves an increased vulnerability, susceptibility to something new. Not only in Asia, the most populous continent, but it is also the continent with the greatest number of unreached people by far. This is not to say that all these people do not know the name of Christ or could not hear the gospel somewhere, even on radio, but that they cannot hear the gospel in a culturally understandable way from an effective cross-cultural witness. They have no contact with Christians and thus are not effectively reached for Christ. A few are turning to Christ here and there, but the cultural and geographic barriers are still very great. The Apostle Thomas probably founded churches in South India. It is at least 50% likely that the Church of Christ was not the denomination, but Christ's church. Church of Christ was initially planted in India, Afghanistan, Mongolia, and probably Tibet within the first 2 centuries of the Christian era. Christianity, we put that in quotes here, came to China on 4 distinct occasions. I put that in quotes because we're calling any group that names the name of Christ by that name. Came to China on 4 distinct occasions, and only the 4th succeeded. The first 3 were exclusively Catholic. Again, they named the name of Christ, and so we categorize them that way. The 4th was the modern effort of Protestant and Catholic missionaries, not cooperating, but they were both there, which has been increasingly successful with over 100 million, and we put this in quotes too, Christians today, including 75 million evangelicals. Those are groups that name the name of Christ that are not Catholic, not necessarily all saved as we understand the gospel. Most of the great Protestant pioneers started work in Asia. The Danish Hall Mission, we looked at that a few weeks ago, in South India. William Carey in the Bengal of Northeast India. Adoniram Judson in Burma. Henry Knott in the South Seas Island, and Robert Morrison in China. He actually preceded Hudson Taylor. I've got to hurry up and finish my writing while I still have any presence of mind. When I get in front of my computer, I find I have to, when I get the ideas and the references, I just get them all down. And my first collection is just a collage. And then I have to start cutting and pasting and rearranging, and it's a slow process. But if I don't start that way, I'm going to miss some things that are important. I'm not kidding. I really need to get it down. If I last that long. Yeah.
The jury's still out on learning by virtual internet as opposed to books. I mean, there's a lot of studies being taken right now that the people that get it from the old books retain more than what they get on the screen.
Boy, the ones on the screen must really be having a hard time, because I'm a book guy, and yeah. Well, anyway. Anyway, where was I? Considered overall, Asia has not been a particularly fruitful area for missions compared with Africa and Latin America, although church growth in many areas is most encouraging. About 8.8% of Asia's population today is professing Christian. That professing is an important modifier there. Does not necessarily mean they may be sincere and they've responded to what they've been exposed to, but probably in many cases an inadequate exposure to truth to actually understand and trust Christ completely. About 3.6% is, now this is going to sound like it's the wrong tense of the verb, but we're talking about percent, which is singular. So it calls for a singular verb, is, but then evangelicals is going to sound funny. But about 3.6%, that chunk is evangelicals. There has been a vast diversity of results from a low of under 1% evangelicals in Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, and Tajikistan, the Stan brothers, to a high of 12.3 in the Philippines and 16.8 in South Korea. Muslims have been the least responsive. Traditional or Theravada Buddhists have also been hard to win in large numbers. Upper caste Hindus have not been open, and Shinto seems to be the factor in hardening the Japanese to the gospel. Animistic tribes, as elsewhere, have generally been very responsive. Something that is consistent, gives hope, gives freedom, appeals as it should, as it did to us. Herbert Kane, another fellow who is cited in my material and who I didn't know much about, he had a large portfolio of education and missionary credentials. He cited 5 reasons for the smallness of number of results in some areas. In this part of the world, the Christian missionaries encountered ancient, well-developed civilizations. The Christian missionaries came into direct conflict with ancient, highly developed religious systems which antedated or came before Christianity. The missionaries encountered deep-seated, long-standing social and religious practices and prejudices which were inimical to the Christian gospel. And Christianity was closely identified with colonialism, and nobody liked colonialism. Now, colonialists took advantage of favor won by Christian missionaries. Christian missionaries would go into an area, establish rapport, make friends, represent, in an attempt to represent Christ well, were taken to be representing the countries from which they came well. Well, certain elements from those countries came and exploited that good relationship that was established, took advantage of people, and so in those areas then, because Christianity and the nations were associated, Christianity took a black eye too. And then the exclusiveness of Christianity made it unacceptable to the Asians. My mother went with her second husband. My dad died a good while ago, since I've been married, but I've been married a while now too. She and her second husband took a trip to Alaska, and they went into some homes and different places where the natives of the area lived, and it was supposedly a missions trip, but the church she was associated with at the time had no business being involved in missions. They really didn't have anything to offer. But she would notice a picture of Christ on a shelf and these other religious figures and so forth on the same shelf. And these individuals would claim to be Christians. And when asked about these other religious characters and so forth on the shelf, they said, well, we have those just in case. And yeah, Christ has an exclusive claim. It's Christ or it's nothing. It's not Christ plus or any mix of him with anything else. When we realize the sufficiency of Christ, we realize we don't need anything else. And also, we'll quit looking for something else just in case, like these fellows up in Alaska.
Well, that's a quick thought. When up in Evanston, I think, or is it Wilmette? Anyway, I went to school right down the road there on Lake Michigan. There's the House of House of Bahia Birth, and and I had a chance to do some research on that when I went to school up that way, and they're like the Catholics, only opposite. It's an amalgamation. There's that big word again of all the different religions. So that's probably why they had on the shelf those people you were talking about. Oh yeah, here's Jesus, and then all the other religions, because there's religions that believe that. Roman Catholics believe that. That's why they had at Benedictine University, they had the
Dalai Lama.
Dalai Lama over there when I visited 4 years ago. That's what Baha'i Birth does. And when you look at it, I took a couple excursions with ICR, Dwayne Gish, Henry Morse, up in Colorado, Alpha Omega Institute, about 40 years ago. And did you know all the layers and strata of the Grand Canyon are named after Hindu formations? Vichy schist and all that stuff. I couldn't, K-Bob Plateau. And I'm wondering, well, I thought this was America. Why is all these different strata on the Grand Canyon layers of sandstone named after Hindu? I don't know if they were gods or goddesses, but I was really amazed at that. So that was way before Christianity. Some guy came in there and started naming these according to Hindu beliefs. We got that in America pretty big now.
Eastern mysticism has a strong hold here. Especially on college campuses. The caste system of Hinduism goes back to the 1500 to 500 BC period. Hindu society is divided into four main castes with millions of untouchables, and that classification is assigned to anybody who's below even the bottom caste, below this caste structure. Hindus are locked into a caste for life, supposedly as a consequence of a previous incarnation or a previous life. One's caste rigidly governs a man's occupation, social status, arranged marriage possibilities, and innumerable details of life. Different castes are viewed as, now get this, distinct species. Ugh. The higher on the caste scale, let me get my pages separated here. The higher on the caste scale, the more a Hindu has to lose by becoming a Christian. To make matters worse, since most Christians in India have come from lower castes and even untouchable background, the upper caste Hindu would have to swallow a lot of pride and prejudice to turn to Christ. The irrevocable law of karma means the inevitable law of the consequences of human deeds. Now it does, we need to understand that certain acts have consequences, but this limits all of that permanently to this life. It is not a judgment by a personal God. Sin is irreversible and unforgivable. There is no one there to forgive. It is the major feature of Gautama, the Buddha, carried over into Buddhism as well. Although Buddhism does not have a caste system, the law of karma, when consistently followed, leads to fatalism and hopelessness. You mess up, and that's it. But even if you didn't mess up, there's nothing out there. it's a lose-lose situation. Ancestor worship. I know some people in this country not associated with any Eastern religions who sort of seem to think this way. Ancestor worship was already found in China before the 6th century BC, when Confucianism and Taoism were founded. It is not just living parents and grandparents who are to be revered. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with, we've lost something in this country about having reverence and respect for our elders. But this goes beyond that, who are to be revered, but also the dead. Thus, for a Chinese or Japanese Christian convert to stop ancestor worship is to disgrace the family. It's taken by other members of the family as an insult, a big insult. The Japanese added emperor worship to ancestor worship and thereby compounded the difficulty. Japanese Shinto culture puts great stress upon ethnic and national identity. In the Shinto scriptures, the emperor is seen as a descendant of the gods. In a real sense, the Japanese themselves are seen as a divine superior people. To become a Christian is to deny this entire heritage. Jesus said, what? That a prophet's not without honor. Yeah, save in his own country, his own household. Yeah. And I think that principle is multiplied in this structure. Bruce, you had something?
Another quick thought when we're talking about Far Eastern religions. I remember Academy Award movie called Quo Vadis with Robert Taylor and Peter Ustinov, where Peter Ustinov played Nero, and he started killing all the Christians. It was back in the 50s this movie came out. Well, he thought he was a god. And all these great conquerors, they thought Robert Taylor was a god because he was in charge of all the legions with a campaign of war in Africa. He came back, and Peter Ustinov, Nero, was watching the great parade, and Robert Taylor's aide, who was a great general, Robert Taylor was a great general. He said, "Remember, you're just a man. You're only a man." And I never forgot that, because the Roman people think the same way that you just mentioned in the Far East. They think there's gods. They're gods, and their kinfolk are gods.
That religious persuasion influence was largely behind the Japanese motivation in World War II. Right. Since then, it has been tempered considerably, but not eliminated. Generally speaking, the East Asian religions are very inclusivistic. Only Islam makes strong, exclusive claims like Christianity. What they're saying is the others bring outside entities and influences in and assimilates them, much as the Catholic Church does. And that's how the Catholic Church has grown as it has over the centuries. That way they minimize offense and maximize coming together on no standard, no absolute standard. They're totally flexible. Only Islam makes strong, exclusive claims like Christianity. But the monistic, which is a view in metaphysics that reality is a unified whole and that all existing things can be ascribed to or described by a single concept or system. Pantheistic religions like Hinduism and Buddhism tend to feel that no one religion or school of religion has the whole truth. Hindus, for example, have no problem accepting Jesus into their pantheon of deities, along with Krishna and even Buddha. These religions tend to see man as good, not sinful, so the idea of a unique salvation from sin and depravity is repugnant to them. And I think I'm going to call it right there for today. Got another section that starts right there.